Hello, welcome to SHOWstudio, a new series of head-to-head. Men's Autumn-Winter 19 just finished, and so we're ready to talk about it. We are going back head-to-head on London with the lovely Stephen Jones. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, it's quite some time ago, but we remember most of it, and yes. I know you had your hand on a lot of it, but we're going into your hats at the end. But you wanted to say something to start?
It's so funny you say it's quite a long time ago, and that's such fashion speak, because it was only like 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks, yeah, I know. But you know, in the meantime, we've seen Pitti, Milan, Paris, and couture. So
yeah. Fashion years are like dog years, anyway.
Yeah, I had to re-look into my notes this morning, but I think one cannot talk about London without starting by saying what I think, and correct me if you think differently, that London is still the capital of creativity, of free reign creativity, that we don't know if we will ever make money, but at least it pushes the boundaries of fashion forward.
Totally, totally. I mean, it's interesting because there have been lots of conversations where there is, because of mixed shows, having boys and girls in the same shows, whether there's actually a validity for having a men's fashion week, both in London and in New York, for example. What's the point of it? I think one of the points of it creates an envelope within which many of the younger designers could show, because if they were showing at the same time as women's, they would
disappear.
They would disappear completely. There's so much competition.
There's also very much, probably much more than anywhere else, this narrative of gender neutral. And I'm thinking about the first show of the week, which is not a week, it's like a long weekend in London, but the first show was Art School. Mm-hmm. And we love the boys of Art School here very much, especially for what they stand for. Yeah. And their gender neutrality is real, it's authentic, it's not a trend, it's who they are, and that's what they believe in. And it's not only gender neutral, but it's also body shape neutral, meaning, you know, it's different ages, different bodies, different kind of people. And I think that was very good. I think they stepped up a little bit with their collection, so I think they're bound to be very successful. Their show was very interesting. It was a show, the first one, where they were alone and not linked to fashionista, so it was their first solo show. They put up some choreography, they cast friends of them, there were people that are not model at all, especially that. And it was a good start. It's not yet the epitome of top fashion, but it's a very good start, and the collection are better and better. By the way, I wore Art School at the Fashion Award, and I thought it was really lovely to be dressed by people that I believe in so much.
Yeah, I remember seeing you there.
But I would like to talk about my favorite, and my favorite is Craig Green.
Right.
I know you don't work with Craig, but I think one thing I want to say about Craig is that when you go to a Craig Green show, you know you can expect something that brings you in holistically, and it didn't disappoint. I mean, the collection was spectacular, but you know, the site, the atmosphere, we were in the dark, and then suddenly the light came out so bright that nobody could keep their eyes open, and they took away the dark, whatever, rubber plastic from the floor, and it was this very white carpet reflecting all the light, so it was incredibly light. And the music and the colors coming out. So when you go to a Craig Green show, you're in for an emotion. So my question to you is, like, I guess you've seen it, but what about emotions in fashion shows?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that Craig Green is an extraordinary designer. I absolutely respect him since the beginning. I remember in the exhibition at the Met, China Through the Looking Glass, he had an extraordinary installation in there, and Anna Wintour actually was one of his very, very early champions, and that was really before so many people knew him, and Andrew Bolton as well. But every season he comes up with a fantastic new idea, but which is absolutely identifiably him.
Exactly, but very Craig Green.
You can always tell that it's him, and I loved a few seasons ago when he did the wooden constructions worn on people's backs. Yes. You know, that whole question is it commerce, is it art, or is it whatever? Somehow he defines in so many of his outfits. And I love, there's a very happy combination, the fact that he uses very modern fabrics with sort of almost, or what appears like haute couture techniques. And it's a completely different approach to everybody else. I mean, it reminds me of when Hussein first started. It's like totally different to everything else. And I'm a big fan.
It's funny you mentioned Hussein, because Hussein did, and everybody remembers that amazing show where clothes were becoming furniture or bags, so you can leave this world fast. And I think Craig said something about the escapism. I mean, like, this world is so weird that he had these nomad people that were ready to go no matter what. So the clothes are very simple, yet not that simple. You know, there's layering, there's some, I don't know how to explain, but I mean, there's this idea of being movable, being always ready to go, and that was very much something that Hussein did many years ago. So it's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, and I have to say the bubble wrap, the plastic clothes,
plastic was extraordinary.
So genius. And I think the great thing about Craig, he's incredibly passionate and serious about what he does, but he also has a great sense of humor about it. And somehow that combination of how he thinks you see it in the clothes is not as though they're pompous.
Never.
It's not as though they're trying too hard. They are extreme, but somehow there's a naturalness, or he's just a very, very clever designer.
It's funny because someone backstage said to him, plastic, it was very beautiful, but plastic is the #1 enemy at the moment. And his answer was so amazing. He said, oh yeah, it's true, but you know, these are clothes, and so it's not single-use plastic. And in a way, it's like, it's recycled, you know, and it's all about creating and having an idea and making something different, as you said. And those 6 or 9 looks in colorful plastic were all over.
Yeah.
They were everywhere, and they stood backstage all together, and everybody was photographing them and Instagramming them. It's very, and one thing that I notice whenever I see student shows, menswear student shows, or young people menswear shows, you can see Craig Green influence everywhere.
Sure.
And that's where you see how important what he does is.
Yeah, I mean, he's been around for quite a while now. And, you know, he's really supported by Sarah Band as well, which is great.
He was there for a few years.
Yeah, but it's interesting, I'd like to touch on what you said about single-use plastic. And maybe this is the biggest question in fashion at the moment, is sustainability, recycling, consumption, all of these questions. And I think so many of these designers are trying to resolve them. I mean, for example, the idea of using plastic, yes, you could say, well, they're wiped clean, therefore they don't have to be laundered, therefore they don't have to be washed. I mean, it's all the different arguments, like the yes to fur or the no fur or the fake fur. It's so great that we're asking all these questions now. Nobody has the real answer, and because it's never yes or no, it's always shades of grey.
There's always very many shades. Yeah, I hear you, but it was very funny because I had the impression from his actual I didn't read that, I saw him. His actual reaction, he was, I haven't thought about that, but Craig being Craig, he didn't try to make up something or to, he was just very spontaneous, and that, you know, it's like atoning for, did I sin? Well, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
In the name of creativity.
Yeah, and it's interesting about the plastic thing, and if the other shows I did work on was John Skelton's show, and that's very much about recycled fabrics.
It's all recycled, right,
and
what he does?
Hand-woven, and, you know, we made felt ourselves, and he knew the sheep that it was shorn from.
What do you mean we made felt ourselves? What does that mean?
We made felt hats, and we actually made the felt.
The actual fabric?
We made the actual fabric, and, you know, he goes to France and buys vintage fabrics and then overdyes them, and showed this incredibly powerful show that upset very many people, I have to say.
Yeah, it wasn't because of the clothes, it was more because of what he staged, you know, these people coming up to the viewer and taking off their phones, or making faces at them, or right? I wasn't there, but I've seen it, and one of my friends was walking in it, and so he told me a little bit about that.
Yes, well, I mean, for example, he did a show at the V&A, and they all had to recite poetry, and they had the poems 2 weeks beforehand, so they had to learn them. So it's very intense. I think he's always shown independently, but now he's part of the Fashion Week, so he's getting to a much wider audience.
Tell me a little bit about the hats.
The hats. Well, that's his brother, I think, actually, who's a very fantastically fey fashion student, or was. So the hats, a few different ones, I mean, two main different ones. There was one which was made out of this handmade felt, and it was a very, very simple construction.
And the felt was made in your studio or in his?
Both actually, and then we remounted it, and some of them had sort of frilly brims and a slightly square silhouette, and some of them, this particular one was knitted out of jute, and you know, it was an incredibly fine yarn. And I remember when I curated this exhibition at the V&A 10 years ago now, it's an anthology by Stephen Jones, and there was some berets in there which were Tudor berets, which had been found wrapped up in oil cloth when they were excavating in the city of London, and they'd found 5 hats there which were almost in perfect condition. So I used those as inspiration for this. Thing is, the knit on those was like as fine, almost as fine as t-shirt cotton, but it was knitted by hand. You know, each one would have taken 6 months to knit, but we only had a few weeks.
Yeah, of
and
course.
Certainly not the time or the money. But even so, we did knit this one particular hat, and that was great. I mean, for example, the invitation for the show was a candlestick that he'd made himself, rolled up in a piece of paper. In that way, it was quite
very artisanal and recycled, as you said. So
but they were all for gentlemen of a certain age. I mean, I think most of the models were, you know,
the 40
plus. But it was an interesting another point of view of fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to another person who I think is very interesting and necessary to keep London vibrant, and that's Charles Jeffrey.
Yeah.
And I remember I was sitting at the show, that one show I went, and towards the end, and people have seen, you know, what he did. It was this Peter Pan meets Charles Jeffrey and having fun, you know, trying to escape from the gloom and doom of what's going on. But anyway, I was sitting there, and we were very close to each section of the venue had something happening in front. So I was very close with one of the bathtub with models literally stopping 1 meter from me, and so I could see everything. And I remember looking at Georgie, who was sitting next to me, and watching Georgie and say, I love London. And so that's what it brought out from me.
Absolutely.
Because it was so, again, you know, so happy and so real and so beautiful. And again, you know, and since we're talking about fashion, that's another one who's going from strength to strength. The clothes, the tailoring, the fabric, everything was so much grown up, you know. Every collection is better than the one before, and you're like, this is so amazing. This is the essence of London. I remember coming out of that show really, really happy. Have you watched it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting with him because he himself is almost better known because he looks fantastic.
He looks so gorgeous.
You know, when I see these clothes, I mean, it looks, these look like him. Every single outfit you can imagine him wearing. And it's a little bit like Tom Brown wearing a grey suit, or Sonia Rykiel wearing a knitted dress. The designers themselves, they're sort of essentially clothing themselves and saying, yes, the world can look like me if you want to.
Which is pretty cool, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
Charles Jeffrey.
I mean, I'm sure he's never
Tom Brown, you know.
I'm sure he's never been compared to Sonia Rykiel.
No,
but
that's a first, Charles.
Yeah. But no, I think it was a great collection, that colour and vibrancy, especially, you know, as being an antidote to the political situations that we're going through at the moment. I think this was a fantastic call.
But also, what I like is that the spectacle around the collection matches the collection. And that's also, to go back to Craig, also his style of show matches what then he designs. And sometimes there is a disconnection between the actual collection and the setting. And then you don't know if it's the setting just to distract, while that was perfect, you know. And again, about gender neutrality and normal people walking or looking like him. And I was looking at some tailoring and some images online, and I thought it's really a good collection. Very wearable, believe it or not. You know, if you take back a little bit of styling, and there's a lot of stuff that I would want to buy immediately, you know.
What I find so reassuring about it, it's not 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s revival.
Not at all. It's very modern, very forward.
And as being sort of a slightly older person, I'm always very concerned when I see revivals of styles that I know. And I'm so pleased that him and Craig Green and other designers in London are forging their own way for their generation, and they're not looking back at what we did. Maybe they're looking over their shoulder a little bit, or one eye, but, you know, when we see this is really not referencing the past. I think, very interestingly enough, the final way that the clothes look was very similar to Martin Margiela couture show, which was shown 1 week later.
Yeah, the doodling, googling, the doodling, this one, not all, there was a lot of, you know, there were the typical Charles Jeffries checks, but this one,
but somehow,
it's very close to what John had in
the background.
In his mind.
And, you know, John is absolutely says at the moment that he is not only doing, I mean, we'll come on to this when we talk about couture, he's not only doing what he likes, but he's almost a curator for all the different young interns who are working with him, and it's their ideas.
Hold your horses. We're going to do a couture head-to-head together in a few weeks, and we cannot spoil that now. But I agree.
It's so interesting about this thing.
I think we're showing now the two together. It's true, it's not the same shape, it's not the same, but
it's
there is the same
vibrancy.
kind of print and vibrancy, exactly.
Yeah, the same energy, which I think is great. And if you had to say, well, what's fashion now, or what's fashion in 6 months' time, this is it.
Yeah, I think, and again, you know, Charles is another one that influences a lot of young people from all over the world, and that's a sign, you know, that's a sign of relevance, that's a sign of something that it's desirable and shows you what's going to happen. See, there is a lot of Scottish check, which is one of his signature. Then, okay, so that was for me, when I talk about Craig and Charles, it was what, if I had to take away only two, probably that's what touched me the most. But I thought there was something that was very interesting. It was Sam Ross for A Cold War. And Sam is not loved by everybody. There's some people that say, oh, he's not a designer, or he's copying, he's doing this and that. I said this to my young colleagues in the studio here once, and they looked at me like, is she crazy? I said, mind my words, in 10 years, I think Craig will be the Mucha or the Azedin, you know, the one who dictates where it's going. But Sam, A Cold War, will be the Armani, the one who had made a lot of money, the one who has created an empire. And maybe I'm being carried away a little bit here, but I think there's something very smart in what he does. And, you know, he's an art director, and so the show was this, you know, it was very art directed. So we were sitting in front of water. You had this dancer struggling in the water in the dark, and then one was being taken away and probably it was like the immigrants, you know, and be detached by the group, and then it was dead, and then all the models were walking, and everyone, and that's something that I noticed immediately, were turned at a certain point, were looking up their shoulders, but like in a worried way, so turning around. So there was this dystopian sort of thing, but then he saw the light at the end of the tunnel. There was a bulldog, real one, barking, and that made Sarah Moore freak out, by the way. She was sitting next to me. She's like, oh,
poor thing,
what
this
about
season
the dog?
She hasn't coped very well.
So, you know, there was this, some world, which is a bit complicated, but then you go through the collection and there are all the staples of what young people want, most of them, and there's men and women, and it's quite easy to wear, you know, and I think it's going to be very successful. I think commercially that's going to be probably the most successful of all.
I mean, absolutely. I can see sort of high street brands copying this very effectively, very quickly, because the shapes, so often, they're things that you understand. But also, fashion works when it's worn. If it's just for a show, it doesn't make sense. And yeah, I mean, it's funny that you should say about Armani. There is, interesting about this, there is a fluid elegance, which is Armani. When, you know, Armani hasn't been on people's
modern
lips.
Modern Armani,
for quite a while, but actually so many people have been talking to me about Armani and what Armani did, and the fluidity and the softness and the elegance. And it's funny because we're talking about London now, but the word elegant has rarely been used in menswear in the past 4 or 5 years, but suddenly it's being used again.
Yeah, I think beautiful is back, if I can say it like this. I think there was also, you know, now we've been also then in Milan and in Paris, and everybody knows that tailoring is very much back, and everybody's trying to do a modern tailoring for young guys. So it's less vêtement style, you know, it's less long t-shirt and...
Sure.
But I think he did it in a very smart way. Then it's, you know, like it or not, some people love it, some people don't, some people want to belong to his tribe, some others don't want to belong to his tribe, but I think...
He's a great colorist, by the way.
Yeah, I think him, like Virgil, they're going to go far.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's some pieces that are really, really desirable here, and then you're quite free to wear them the way you want. But in my young colleagues' circle here, it's not the favorite. Why do you think?
I don't know. I think we are living in a very extreme fashion bubble here at SHOWstudio, which is not like the world outside or the rest of Britain or the rest of the world. Everything sort of exists here. I think what people hear and what people want within the fashion world is something which, when they're looking at the image of it, they want something that really excites them and inspires them. The wearing of clothing is a completely different subject.
Thing.
What SHOWstudio does is sends messages, sends images all around the world, but it is about the image of something. It's how something is represented, maybe not the physicality of something. So that's why, you know, they don't look so great in an image, but actually maybe to wear they are a more wearable thing. Yeah,
I think I hear what you say, and it's true. I still think that his clothes look pretty good, though.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, maybe he hasn't reinvented the wheel like others, but I think he's someone to follow. He's someone that he's here to stay for a while. He also just got investment from Tomorrow Consulting. You know, he's getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. Let's talk about the people you work with that you know well.
I mean, it's funny. One other thing I'd like to say, I've just come from the big Dior exhibition that I was installing today, and the opening was last night, and the gala is tonight. It's very interesting to see. There's one particular section which is all the different designers at Dior lined up. And for example, when Dior was creating, it was very much about the private client. When Saint Laurent was there for a couple of years, it was still carrying on from that, but trying to assimilate into the actual clothes, rock and roll. But when Marc Bohan started there in the 1960s, it was about the image of the clothing. Not only about the wearing of it, it's how the thing looked in a picture, because that was suddenly at the beginning of the 60s, that was the sort of the start of modern media. And so that difference between what happened in the 40s and 50s, and then suddenly in the 60s it changed, you know, we still see that now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the reality of clothing versus how it looks on the screen, and the image of clothing, how Nick Knight, for example, can take a white T-shirt and make it look like the most extreme thing. But if you saw that white T-shirt walking down a runway, it would look dull.
Yeah, yeah, very, very good, very well said.
Thank you.
So you worked with, you also worked with JordanLuca.
Yeah, JordanLuca.
I love very much, the lovely boys.
Yeah, and they were here.
Great work, yeah, they were here in a
yeah,
panel.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. The hats were very good as usual. I think their collection is also going from strength to strength. How was it, and how did it happen that you worked with them?
I knew Jordan literally when he was 2 weeks old.
Oh, he didn't say that to me. He said to me he worked with you or he interned with you, right?
I knew his mother and I knew his aunt. And his aunt, this lady called Kim Bowen, who Nick knows too, was the person who started my company with me. So
that's
Lisa, who's Kim's younger sister, had this little boy called Jordan, and literally he was in my arms this big, and I was rocking him trying to get the little painful person to asleep, but you know, eventually he did go to sleep. But anyway, now he's all grown up and 35 or something. Like
no, a little bit younger than that, but he's been a model
30.
as well. He's
he did model, and then he came to me and learned how to make hats. But him with LUCA, they approached, even though Jordan makes hats himself, they approached me and asked if I could make some hats for them, which was I felt like slightly strange about, but it was a very interesting approach, and I wondered what hats I could do. You know, every time I work with somebody, it has to be a different expression, and I thought, well, maybe we just want to continue the hats onto the head, the clothes onto the clothes onto the head, and
you did an amazing job, I think.
This was how I came up, and this is a bonnet which has got almost like a collar on the front of it. And there was another one which was like a hood, but literally everything was very, very closely referenced to the clothes.
What they were wearing. Is that the hood?
Yeah.
I noticed, I mean, I knew it was you, and I didn't know the story about you knowing him ever since he was born, but I noticed that, and I thought, I mean, I know how good you are, but I thought, this is not really in your comfort zone, and yet it's absolutely perfect. And so actually it is in your comfort zone. I think everything is. Well,
the funniest thing about it is we had a big meeting, and this is sometimes how, when I'm working with designers at work, and you know, Jordan and LUCA worked together, and they came in to see me, and I started to get passionate and trying to find a new way of doing things. You know, otherwise, why does the world need another hat? You know, it doesn't. Well, actually it does, but I wanted to try and come up with a new formula, so I did all this and said and sort of sold them an idea and said, this is what we should be doing, and this, and apparently, and I found this out later, they went outside and said, that's not what we wanted at all.
But they followed your lead.
Yeah, but they followed, and you know, they sort of had confidence, and it was great that
they had something else in mind.
Yeah, they had something else in mind. They saw hats fulfilling a different purpose. I wanted to find something which was only for them and exclusively for them.
Well done, well thought. It was really good. It was a small collection and a small presentation because they can't afford.
And this, I love this. This is
with
a
the
hood.
corset.
This is a hood, and it's got a lapel on it, and revers, and it's got a belt. That it's almost like a trench coat, but it's a hood made out of a trench coat using trench coat ideals and details.
Fantastic, well done. And well done, JordanLuca, with a small, lovely presentation.
I think they're going to go a long way. I mean, they're nice guys, and they're selling. I know they're selling very well.
There's a moment, you know, the problem with these young people, no matter how talented they are, there's a moment where they need help, because even the sales, even if they're good, they're not enough because the collections are small. So I really hope they will find the financial help.
Yeah, I mean, I think they will do, but for every designer, the changing gear to making, like changing gear in a car, for the financial changing gear, the image changing gear, the distribution changing gear, you know, when you're sort of really ramping it up, is very difficult to do. And you have to be lucky too.
Yeah,
I mean, you can make your own luck, but you have
for a big brand, or someone acquires you, like what happened with Sam and Tomorrow, or your sales are so amazing that you don't need anything, but it's very hard not to need anybody. You will need an injection of finance at a certain point.
I think nowadays that's what happens, because the bigger brands, for example, LVMH brands, Kering brands, Armani, Richemont, all those brands are so strong to compete against those in the established world. I mean, forget it.
Forget it.
Which is why, Craig Green and Charles Jeffrey and JordanLuca, maybe they're finding a different way, because that's the only way they compete. They have to create their own way.
There will also be a moment where, I'm not wishing anybody any ill fate, but some of those big ones are old.
Oh yeah.
And so if their brands need to continue, they will need young, fresh designers and talents, or these new brands will take over, I tell you. I mean, Craig will be there as one of the great creators, and a Cold Wall will be big.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
So many brands fail, so many established brands fail. Dior exists, Jacques Fath doesn't exist, Burberry flourishes, Jaeger went completely away.
Sometimes it depends also on the capital you have behind, and the talent you can hire, and the advertising you can. I don't know. I mean, that's another discussion. But so hopefully these people will thrive. And another one that I think is to be watched, because it's very good, is Per Gottesson, and he did a fantastic show. Him too was exploring theme of infancy and happiness, and the bedroom of a child, and he played with denim, and he did, and I don't remember the details now. We were looking at it together, but I remember coming out of that and also thinking, we have some great talent in London.
Yeah.
And that was also yet a different way of being a cool, quite elegant and modern kid, or man. And with some very desirable pieces, with some very desirable denim, but also some tailoring that was worth a notice. Do you know anything about Per? You don't
Not
really work
really.
with it?
And I have to say, fashion is such a difficult thing to do. Yeah, you can make money out of it sometimes. Yeah, you can be a successful designer. But, there was only one Yves Saint Laurent. There was only one Jean-Paul Gaultier.
Cristobal Balenciaga.
There was one Balenciaga. There was one Lee McQueen. There was one Gian Galliano. So
there is still one Gian Galliano. It's alive.
Who in London can you see that in 20 years' time there'll be a great icon of design?
Craig.
Exactly.
Am I right, or it's just me?
No, I really believe that. I really believe
master.
He's got the breadth of vision, the commitment.
The originality.
The originality, the invention. There's loads of other things like the money I just mentioned before, which have got to be sorted out as well. But if you don't have that passion and that dynamism and that ability to excite people, you'll never make it as a great.
Yeah.
And maybe he has that chance.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more, and also he's such a lovely person, and that helps today. However, I also think that the world has changed a little bit, and so there will be room for more. I think today it's not only about the great designer, like I always say in music, there's Mozart and then very good musicians, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So the people you mentioned are the Mozart of their era, the one that changed things, and that's why I mentioned Craig. But I also think that today, fashion is so democratized, it's so much bigger a platform that there is room for different kind of people, the great marketeer, because we can't, we're talking about London now, but Kim Jones, hello, there are the great marketeers, the great designer, the great inventor, the great disruptor. Mm-hmm. I think there is room for more than one category, not one name, one category.
Yeah, absolutely, there is room for more. And there's so many different levels on which those people can operate. Yeah. If you're thinking of the pinnacle, the apex.
What about Kim Jones?
Yeah, he's in Paris. Yeah.
I know, so we're talking London only,
Yeah,
okay.
we're talking about London.
So we couldn't conclude London
I mean,
without another one you work with.
Craig is working in London now, but he might work in Paris.
He's international.
Yeah.
He already went to Florence, so what can stop him?
It's funny when you think about people being a London designer as opposed to being an international designer. We fall back on the place that we show being part of the identity of what you do. But actually, strong designers never do that.
No.
They could show anything.
He
could show on the moon and it would still look good.
Agreed. Word about Edward Crutchley?
Edward Crutchley, I worked with him. I work with him.
Amazing hats.
Yeah, at Dior. He works with Kim at Dior as well.
Okay. He works or he worked?
Works.
Okay.
He does two things. So he works with Kim at Dior. He worked with him at Vuitton as well, and he does his own collection. And it was men and women. He
was pretty.
Yeah. He was again, very fluid fabrics. It's
I'm a sucker for fluid fabrics.
Yeah, it's very comfortable fluid fabrics, and it.
Tell us about those witch hats.
They're Korean gats, not hats. And actually, when you type on your phone, an H and a G are next to each other, so quite often I write the word gat instead of hat, funnily enough. We were looking at Korean gats, and this is a very traditional bridal hat, a men's bridal hat from Korea.
Is that a men's bridal hat?
Yeah. Wedding hat. And they're about that proportion, and in Korea they're made up from horsehair, woven horsehair, transparent, and this is made from nylon horsehair, actually, Swiss nylon horsehair. And it's basically a similar silhouette, but of course everybody said witches or they're Welsh ladies or a hat always has
banal enough. I saw witches.
Yeah. So. It was a really interesting collection to work on because he has so many different sorts of fabrics. It's men and women's. There's a lot of grey. It's quite chic. It's a completely different mentality to Craig Green, but he's a younger designer than Craig Green.
Yeah.
How many seasons has Craig been showing for now?
I don't want to say something wrong, but he's been around now for 4 or 5 years, 6.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's been around less than you think because he's so mature in his work. But anyway, Edward is probably younger. But I didn't know he was working with Kim, and so you met him through Kim. Yeah,
I met him through Kim. He does a lot of the fabric research.
Okay.
Right,
interesting. The fabric research, and then he can use ideas and inspirations for his own work.
No, I don't think he does.
No, not in a bad way. I mean, he's confronted with a lot of...
Yeah, so...
I didn't mean it in a bad way.
Yeah, but for example, he knows all those fantastic Italian fabric.
Exactly, he has the
normally,
knowledge.
as a young designer,
Absolutely.
you wouldn't. I mean, it's quite interesting because actually so many young designers do consultancy for other bigger brands, which is to survive. I mean, I've known so many different designers who I've worked with who have important portfolios that they have to go and show in Italy after the collections. I mean, everybody does it.
But that's the way, and why not? And also, I think when you work with a big brand like Dior, you learn about logistics and systems, and you know, and why not? Well, I think we can close it here. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon to cover couture together.
Okay, great. Lovely to see you. Bye bye.